Language है ना? ठीक है.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's live international webinar. There is a famous quote, education is the passport to the future. Tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. And that is quite true, isn't it? A proper education is something that tends to a proper future. And to cope with a proper level of education, we need information on whatever we are facing in and out from every possible way. And today's event will provide us with lots of information on this regard. It's an honor itself to greet you all to this event. It is my privilege to welcome our chief guests, eminent speakers, delegates, and participants on today's webinar. Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic is going to host this live international webinar, which is based on engineering education towards Industry 4.0 and career path with supply chain management. We are delighted and also honored to be able to conduct this event and to make the acquaintance of you all here at Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic. Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic is a premier technical educational institute in West Bengal and was established by Sri Asian Mishra, the founder director of Eastern India Educational Trust. Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic was established with the endeavor of providing quality education on technological aspects. We are providing diploma engineering education in the field of electrical, mechanical, computer science and technology, and mining, and civil. Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic persistently seeks and adopts inventive methods to improve the quality of higher education on a consistent basis. This institution has been functioning since 2015 and it is approved by All India Council of Technical Education under the Ministry of MHRD and affiliated to West Bengal State Council of Technical Education, Technical and Vocational Education and Skill Development. Let me first acknowledge the presence of some of our eminent guests. Our respected principal madam and patron of this international webinar, Dr. Lisha Mishra, and our beloved Dean of Academics and the convener of today's event, Professor Tanmay Singh, and a very special person, the keynote speaker of today's event, Professor Dr. Vikas Kumar, the Director of Research and Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at Bristol Business School, University of the West England, UK, and our beloved Dean Administrative Officer, Sri Rana Chakrabarti sir. First of all, we will have our traditional auspicious lamp lighting ceremony. We are all familiar with beginnings. They can be small steps, but its impact can be experienced in giant leaps. So I humbly request our Honorable Principal Madam, Dr. Lisha Mishra, our respected Dean of Academics, Sri Tanmay Singh, and our Administrative Officer, Sri Rana Chakrabarti sir, to kindly make a new beginning through illuminating the traditional lighting of lamps. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It's a symbolic act of the light that shines. It's a symbolic act of the light that shines within all our hearts. We pray for the blessings of all humanity. I consider it a great honor to welcome our patron, the principal of Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic, Dr. Lisha Mishra, to give her inaugural speech. Please, ma'am.
अरे दादा मैडम को बोलते हुए मतलब जीते थे कॉलेज बोलो बॉस जीते बोल रहा था मैडम की तरह बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
I'd like to welcome our patron and the principal of Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic, Dr. Lisha Mishra, to give her inaugural speech. Please, ma'am.
Thank you, Devasis. Good afternoon, everybody. It is our great honor for me to introduce and welcome our honorable speaker, Professor Vikas Kumar. He is a Director of Research and Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at Bristol Business School, University of the West of England, UK. He was over a decade of teaching and research experience and is a fellow of AHEA. Prior to joining the UWE in 2013, he was a lecturer in management at Dublin City University Business School. That is, his period was 2009 to 2013. Professor Kumar is actively involved in supervising UG and PG dissertations and doctoral students, that is PhDs. Professor Kumar's current research focus is on sustainable supply chain management and supply chain 4.0. His other research interests include circular economy, short food supply chains, green supply chain, operation strategy, operational excellence, and service supply chains. Area of expertise of Professor Vikas Kumar are sustainable supply chain management, food supply chains, industry 4.0, digital supply chain management, structural equation modeling, service operations management, short food supply chains, operational excellence. Today, we are privileged to have an opportunity to listen to the topic Engineering Education Towards Industry 4.0 and Career Path with Supply Chain Management. On behalf of all gathered here, I welcome you, sir, to this literary afternoon of this international webinar. Thank you all.
Your invaluable words. Now, I would like to request our convener and respected Dean of Academics of Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic, Professor Tanma Singho, to convey his message. Please, sir.
Thank you, sir. This is a great privilege for me to introduce and welcome our honorable speaker, Sir Vikas Kumar. He is the Director of Research and Profession of Operation and Supply Chain Management in Bristol University, University of West of England, UK. Honorable Principal Ma'am, Administrative Officer, Training and Placement Officer, and all departmental in charge and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of the webinar is on engineering education towards industry 4.0 and career path with supply chain management. Today, we have about 200 plus participants, industry experts and professionals joining the international webinar. and participating came through here to discuss on the topic engineering education towards industry 4.0 and the career path with supply chain management. Actually, Industry 4.0 is originally a future vision described by the high-tech strategy of the German government that is conveyed upon the information and communication technology. As you all know about the cyber physical system, Internet of Things, which is we are very much familiar, physical internet and internet of service to achieve a high degree of flexibility in production, higher productivity rates through real-time monitoring, diagnosis, and lower wastage rate of material in production. An important part of the task in the preparation of Industry 4.0 is the adoption of higher education to the requirement of the vision. In a particular, in the part of engineering education, actually, today we are fortunate to have an opportunity to listen engineering education towards 4.0 and career path with supply chain management by Professor Dr. Vikas Kumar this afternoon, sir. On behalf of all gathered here, I welcome you, sir, for the literary afternoon of the international webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for addressing speech. Well, let's focus on today's event now. Engineering education towards industry 4.0 and career path with supply chain management. Digitalization is one mega trend in the century and holds the potential to drastically transform various industries and production techniques. Based on this trend, the term Industry 4.0 has emerged. The main strategic challenge for adopting Industry 4.0 is to educate and recruit skilled workers. The universities are course active to educate graduate students to be competent for future work profiles, and that requires upgrading curriculum, teaching methods, and public or industrial collaboration. This live event will focus on this regard and can be considered as a first step in developing a roadmap for engineering education. To adopt Industry 4.0 vision at the national level on this aspect, we feel proud to announce the name of that special person who is currently researching on this timely theme. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dr. Vikas Kumar, the Director of Research and Professor of Operations and Supply Chain Management at Bristol Business School, University of the West of England, UK. Professor Kumar works very closely with industries, and we find ourselves fortunate enough to gather knowledge from him. Sir, the screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desish. And I would like to firstly thank you, all the organizers, for inviting me for this particular session, particularly Dr. Mishra and Mr. Talmashenga. A warm welcome, and I would say good afternoon to everyone who is here listening to me. As everybody's just mentioned, this is a very topical domain, I think, which certainly, is quite interesting as we all slowly transition towards this Industry 4.0. So the objective of this particular session, from my perspective, would be to kind of, touch upon, I would say, probably start with the impact of the COVID-19 and I think how this technology is actually assisting during this time. To give you a bit of a background, like where this emerging concept of Industry 4.0 is coming and how different countries are moving towards adopting this particular trend to ensure that the future is ready. And then I will move on to the core aspect. I think that's why we are here to discuss about the impact of this technologies on our engineering education. And finally, I will sum up my talk by giving a bit of an overview of the trend in the supply chain management domain from the career perspective. So let me first try to share the screen and let me know if you all can see my slides. Just give me a second. Okay, so it might take a minute to upload, and once it's there, we will kick off this session. Am I clearly audible? Can you just confirm that you can hear me clearly? Yeah, I think it's taking a bit time to, I think it's already uploaded, it's just processing, so hopefully we should be ready in a minute. Okay, there may be some issues with the internet speed, and maybe that's why it's taking a bit more time, but I'm sure it will be ready pretty soon. Yeah. Are you able to see my slides? Can I just check? Yes? Can anybody just type a comment or just unmute and say yes, they can hear and they can see my slides? Okay, so I'm assuming that you all can see me, and you all can hear me very clearly, and also can actually see my slides. All right, thank you. Thank you very much for confirming. Right, so as I said, like this is a domain, I think, and I think it's a question that's being asked not just in India, and not the reason why we're just discussing here. It's also in the Western world, because I think when we talk about embarking on the journey toward the technology, normally Western countries are at the forefront in this domain. Particularly in the UK, I think the UK government started pushing basically around Industry 4.0 since 2014, when the government launched a significant amount of funding to support industries as well as the universities to ensure this is smooth transition. And they have certainly made a big kind of leap in that domain, but still there's a vast amount of the scope and in the areas that still we can move forward. So while we are actually leading in some domain, many of the developing countries like India is also pretty much in the similar trajectory, and slowly they are catching up. So let's try to look at how this shift towards the technology is changing our education as our curriculum as well. So what I'm going to cover quickly in the next step for 40 minutes or so, I'll start with a bit of an introduction, but I believe a lot of people have already introduced me a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing myself. But then I'll move on to talk a little bit about the general context, basically the impact of the COVID-19 that is having on the higher education sector. And then about the Industry 4.0 revolution, assuming that many of you are students, you may have heard this buzzwords, but I think it's always useful to have a bit of the background context information. And then we will move towards the future of higher education, where we'll discuss about the Engineering Education 4.0, what it is and what it means, and how it is going to shape the future education. And finally, I'll wrap up my session by discussing some of the impacts on the supply chain management career domain. So as I think there was a brief introduction about myself, so I'm not going to reiterate myself, but just to give you a bit of context that I did my engineering degree in India from National Institute of Foundry and Force Technology, which is a central government-run institution, back in 2005 in metallurgy and materials engineering. So I'm also an engineer, But then I moved to UK to do my PhD, which was in management studies. But in between finishing my engineering degree and moving to UK to do my PhD, I worked briefly at the University of Hong Kong and the Department of Industrial Manufacturing System Engineering. I started my career in DCU, like you've heard from other colleagues, and then currently I'm at the University of West of England as a director of research, looking after the research portfolio of the whole business school, and also I'm there as a professor of operations and supply chain management. I just want to apologize a bit in advance because I've got a bit of sore throat, so you might find me coughing in between. So what you see here on the slide is just a bit of snapshot about the Bristol, the city where I come from. It's a fantastic city, quite a mix of modern and I would say traditional architecture. And on the right-hand side, you see some of the pictures of the campus. The university used to be Polytechnic institution until 1992, where a number of universities were converted, polytechnics were converted into universities. So it's one of the very younger universities down in the UK. But we have done fairly well. I think currently we ranked in the top 25 in the UK. So it's a major achievement as a polytechnic converted university, only 30, 40 years of history. And we're doing quite well on the research side as well. I think our quality of research is always rated quite high. And Bristol itself is a fantastic place and often rated as the best place to live within the UK. So if you ever get a chance to come to Bristol, please do visit. It's a fantastic city. At the moment, in the business school, apart from leading the research domain, I also jointly lead a small research group where you can see all the fantastic researchers here, where we work in a number of different areas. As you can see, the digital economy is one of the key research interest domain where a number of us are involved. And they're all actually leading a different set of domains, publishing in high impact journals, securing research funding, working on the policy documents, and many of our research has been recommended by the UK government, as well as abroad. Now, to bring you back to the main context, and I think the reason why it's important to look at before we jump on to the Industry 4.0 and how it's shaping the engineering education, because the last 2 years have been really difficult for all of us. I think we are facing a significant challenge with this pandemic. I think particularly the impact of this pandemic in the higher education system section has been the most. I heard until a few months ago, I think still many schools were closed in many parts of this country. In the UK, most of the schools were almost closed, as particularly during the first wave. That was back in March 2020 until June or July 2020. But since then, the UK government has been quite bold, particularly pushing for the educational sites to be open and functioning, as normally they would do. With some restrictions. Primarily, I think the primary education has been always open throughout this period. Even despite at the moment where the Omicron cases are going significantly higher, I think the UK is reporting nearly about more than 200,000 cases a day at this stage. But government is quite sure that we should be keeping our schools open. So schools are still open, it's functioning. Universities are open as well with some restriction, primarily around wearing the mask, especially when you're in class setting. But if you look at the challenges, in the UK, of course, being a developed country, there's no dearth of resources. So the system is in place. There's plenty of support. But that's not the case throughout the globe. And I think I will show you in a minute. I think many countries are really struggling. Many regions are really struggling. And I think that is already kind of putting an impact. Where the education sector was already kind of being affected by a number of other things, particularly around in African nations, in the Middle East, where you had armed conflicts, you've got forced displacement, and also the climate change is having an impact. And there was an estimate about 75 million in youth children, I think, being affected through this. The dropout rates, again, is quite significant in many countries, and you would be surprised to know that's also the case even in the UK. So all the universities are actually working really hard to ensure that the students who join the university, they don't drop out for other reasons, whether it is about the financial assistance, whether it's about the mental health, whether it's about some other situations. So there's plenty of support. I think they're all trying to put together to ensure that, the students do continue their education. There was a report by UNESCO back in 2020, April, as you could see, where they kind of estimated the impact of the first wave of the COVID-19, where almost in 185 countries, where institutions were either closed. And you can imagine 1.54 billion learners, and and that is quite a significant number. When you look at this number, particularly in the post-secondary schools, again, more than 220 million were actually affected by this. And there's a very recent data, perhaps from 2021. Again, you could see that again, half of the world's students are still affected by either partial or the full school closures. And that's what the reason I was referring to, and that's happening in India, that's happening even in some parts of the UK, that's happening in other parts of the world, particularly in many other countries around the globe. And that is a huge impact, and I think a huge blow to the education sector. Now, when we look at the impact of this COVID-19, there was a survey done in the Australia, and I think they kind of asked people from all across the globe, not just in Australia, to complete a survey, to look at what is the impact that is having on the higher education. And as you could see from this slide very clearly, that majority of the continents were actually affected by this pandemic. Mostly in the Europe, I think the data would be biased because I'm sure most of the European countries would have responded significantly to this survey. But it just tells there is whether the percentage wise, whether we agree or not, but certainly it did have an impact. And also on the right hand side, you could see many countries, almost literally everything became standstill. So everything stopped. It was completely closed. And that happened in the UK as well for a while, probably about a month. But then universities and I think every other institutions were almost literally back and up and running. And that's continuing since then. But again, I think that just shows the severity of the impact that is having. Now, this one, I think, just gives you a bit more context in terms of the impact on the teaching and learning. And as you could see, primarily, I think the 67%, the red stuff, the classroom teaching has been replaced by distance teaching and learning. I think when they're referring to distance, it's more about virtual learning. Very much we are interacting right now with each other. And at the moment, despite the cases, for example, in the UK going significantly higher, the government is pushing for face-to-face interaction. But again, there are some physical limitations, like many staff members have tested positive, so they can't come in person because they would infect others. So universities in the UK have generally decided to go for kind of hybrid mode. So they're having some sessions in small groups in person on campus, whereas majority of the last sessions where you're having lecture sessions, exactly right now, 200 plus of you are sitting and listening to this talk, it's just not feasible and not safe. So they're actually running those sessions very much in the virtual mode. So that has, again, the reason I was discussing and touching upon these areas, because that again shows that the capability of the digital technologies. Imagine these things happening maybe 15, 20 years ago, which we couldn't imagine. Maybe very few institutions would be able or capable of doing this. But now, in the last 2 years, almost every institution has slowly transitioned towards using these heavy digital technologies, and how you can see the benefit that these technologies do bring to us. But I think again, this is impact particularly of the COVID-19. If you talk about the technology adoption in many countries, many continents actually is significantly lacking, particularly in the African region. As you could see, despite all this major impact, again, many institutions are still struggling to cope up. Though we all being quite optimistic, hoping that things will become to normal pretty soon. Now, let's move on to that. That was a bit of context about the pandemic, and I think the role that digital technologies are playing. But before I would say we dig much more deeper into Industry 4.0, I just wanted to quickly touch upon this. You may have already heard and maybe read a few things. But as we know that, normally when we talk, why we're calling it 4.0, because what we're doing is over the time, we are dividing this, industrial revolution into 4 phases. The first phase was, known as Industry 1.0. It was, probably exactly the time when we slowly moved away from the manual labor to more things to be done in the factory setting. So it was a time when I think the water and the steam power engines were introduced to the factory. Then, in somewhere in the early part of the 20th century, we all entered to the second industrial revolution, and that happened when the steel and the electricity, was introduced in the factories. And certainly the whole objective of introducing these things, and again, led to the improvement in the efficiency and the productivity, and the concept like mass production. I think assembly line was introduced around this second industrial revolution to boost the productivity. Then somewhere, I think starting in 1950s, we moved to the third industrial revolution. I think this was a time when actually the manufacturing organizations slowly started adopting more electronics and computers into their factories. So this was a time where we actually saw kind of a shift from the analog to the digital, and more of the mechanical technology to digital technologies and automotive software. And since then, in the last few decades, what we are now naming that, a term that has been coined Industry 4.0, first time in Germany in 2011, where we're putting a lot of emphasis on the digital technologies. I think, we heard in the very beginning about how the physical systems, the ability of these machines to interact and share and communicate with each other, through the IoT, with the real-time access to the data, and all this actually, I would say, more comprehensive and the interlinked and holistic approach to manufacturing. So that's what we are referring to, the Industry 4.0, and it's certainly changing the way we were doing things in past. So these Industry 4.0 technologies, I think what we've seen, and I think just to give you again a bit of a context, and if you look at about 15 years ago in 2006, we didn't have no idea what the iPhone was, what iPad, Kindle. We are not talking about just 4G, 5G, and WhatsApp, Android, and so on. Because I remember until 2006, before iPhone was launched, the world was predominantly dominated by the feature phones, not the smartphone. But now not everybody may be owning iPhone, but you all have smartphones, equally capable of doing things what iPhone could do. So we're literally actually, moving with the technology at a very fast pace. And that space is going to continue. It will be much more faster. New technologies are emerging every second day. You will have different models of the television, the mobile phones, computers. They all are emerging over time. So what this industrial technology, so Industry 4 technologies are built on? They're built on a number of technologies. It's not just one single technology that we often refer to as Industry 4.0, whether we talk about the Internet of Things, CPS, cloud computing, big data. Additive manufacturing was there for ages, but now we know it as a fancy term like 3D printing. And we talked about the cyber security. There's lots of application of the virtual reality and augmented reality that we see, about the machine learning that we see. Robotics, robots have been again used since the third industrial revolution, but now they're becoming smarter and smarter. So we see that all these technologies are slowly transforming our lives. And if you look at the global initiatives, and I said different countries embarked on this journey at different point in time. Germany and US, they all were leading this thing, UK as well. Over time, India, it picked up around in 2015, China literally around the same time. And now new countries are emerging. We're actually rapidly progressing in this direction, like Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, and particularly in the Southeast Asia. And the reason I think why these industries are pushing for this technology is because they see there's a huge potential and benefit it can bring. But it also, I think, at the same time raises lots of other questions. The reason why we are here to discuss about the, Engineering 4.0, because the key challenge, and that, if you see and read the research in this particular domain, that everybody is struggling with is the skill shortage. So we have the technologies, what can do wonders, but we don't have enough people who really understand those technologies. So what role, we can play, as an engineering institution, what we can do to really kind of, update our curriculum, which is, very much focused to kind of ensure that our graduates are ready and able, and as soon as they graduate and get into the industry, and that is a challenge. So we're trying to kind of think and address that one of the challenges that will ensure that we can survive and we can actually play a vital role in this transition. Now, if you look at in the Indian context, how ready is India for Industry 4.0, despite making some of the significant progress in this domain, if you look at and compare India with the other countries, we are far behind. I think that there's major challenges down there, but I'll also show there's a plenty of growth and opportunities that still lies ahead. And I think as a future workforce that you all will be graduating in time, you can actually can become that drivers of change. And there's some research been done in terms of from the organizations in terms of what they see as a change agents and the different perceptions. As you could see, of course, leaders play a major role. And I think, again, here, for example, if we're here assembling together to discuss about the Industry 4.0, certainly we should be thanking to the leadership here that they're thinking very much about the future. So having that future vision is very important if you really want to grab that opportunity and to also ensure that we make an effective contribution to that domain. So there's quite a lot of, I think, research, again, being done in terms of how leadership drives these trends within the organizations or within the university setting. But just to give you a bit of context, there's still a lot to do in the Indian context. There's another network readiness index. Again, data is about 5 years old in 2016, but again, you could see India is almost literally the very bottom of the table. On the right-hand side, in the green table, that is the latest ranking. But again, India is still, for example, network readiness has jumped, but still 79, not great. They should be certainly within the top 25, 30, at least top 50. And I think there's a numerous reason why we are not actually down there. I mean, some of the context here, especially about the investment that we make in R&D, the government, I would say, the efficiency and ICT use. There's also, I think, a lot of about, the awareness, and I think the contribution that we can make. So, all these things I would say is also kind of a sign that, what role I think we can play, why we are not leading, despite I think India is always known as a technology hub. I think, we have got really good reputation in the Western world when it comes to technology, softwares, and so on. But despite, I think, having that sort of an image, and I think, and the respect for that, if we are not catching up, I think there's something fundamentally not going right. But I think that is also, I think, and I would say another point, that that's something that we need to do collectively. And again, raising our awareness toward these technologies, equipping those kind of skills, we can certainly make a big difference in this particular domain. And as I said, despite we all know the benefits that these technologies can bring, and I think if you look at the research, where there's a numerous kind of case studies, there's all the large organizations where we talk about DHL, Amazon, and so on, they all have been harnessing the benefit of this technology. And they have shown the world that, yes, what we are able to achieve if we use these technologies. But there are certainly challenges, and I think that challenges, those do exist everywhere, not just here. I would say the Indian context is the same. In the UK context as well. The primary, I would say, the infrastructure gap, I think that's quite important. If you're building a technology that is, its primarily relies on interconnection, then you need to have a good infrastructure. The rules and regulations are also there to partly blame. So, there should be the policies, there should be incentives to really support this transition. To give you a context, in the UK, although the large organizations are very much at the forefront of implementing and adopting these technologies, but if you talk about the small and medium enterprises, and SMEs are primarily, I would say, the major contributor to the GDP in almost all the countries. If you look at the global average, I think they contribute around 60% of the GDP of the globe. In the UK context, they contribute literally about 90%. Now, despite contribution to the GDP, if you look at whether the level of technology adoption is much higher, no, that's not the case. But the government has recently realized that, and in the last 2 years, the UK government has been putting lots of incentive in place for SMEs to come forward. So they're giving us in levy to the industries to engage with the universities to transfer those skills. They're putting lots of training programs. They're putting lots of research funding, where actually they're compelling industries and businesses to join hands together with the policymakers and the universities to explore the potential of these technologies. So the lots of, I think, support has been put in place. So, and that is, you can see the benefit of putting those things together, and perhaps, doing similar. I mean, of course, the level of the investment that you can make would vary from country to country, but again, those policies can certainly drive the adoption of these technologies. Same goes for the standards and the interoperability, the ability of the machines to communicate with each other. That has to be streamlined, because that creates lots of confusion. The challenge with the Industry 4.0 primarily is around the data, because every technology that we're using, IoT, sensors, we are collecting huge amount of data. But now the concern is being raised, that what's happening with this data? And already we are seeing how the data is being misused. So the key challenge that every industry is now thinking about, like how to ensure that we secure this data. And so to kind of avoid the potential cyber threats, again, in the Western countries, primarily in the Europe and in the UK, they're investing significantly around this research in the cybersecurity domain, just to counter some of these challenges. Now, there's also fear among many people that these technologies are going to take away our jobs. Yeah, and that fear is not, I would say, strange. It's quite genuine. And we had seen this same transition when 20, 30 years ago, when the computerization was happening in India. I was still probably in the school, but I used to hear quite a lot that people were really scared that now one machine can do almost 10 people's job. So what would happen to those 10 individuals? So that sort of question again is being raised. Like if you're overly relying on the artificial intelligence, machine learning, what humans are going to do? And some of you might have already heard about the emergence of the Industry 5.0 concept. And I think which is again talks about like machines and humans working together, because machines are efficient and can do things, but still it requires some human input. So how do we really work together, not to replace each other? And this is where I think in a cell, like if there will be some opportunities, some job roles will go away. Certainly, it will also give emergence to the new roles, and which I will touch upon anyways in my talk later on today. So that means that we have to really upskill ourselves. We cannot rely on the old traditional knowledge and experience that we had to really kind of thrive and survive in this new digital world. So we need new kind of skill set. We need to have that sort of vision, and that will certainly kind of help us to transition successfully in that domain. So what I mean to kind of convey here is that the numerous challenges do exist, but I think challenges I feel is always good, because if we don't challenge ourselves, we will not come up with a solution. So challenge doesn't mean the end of the world. It means that something that it compels us to rethink. If something we are doing is not working, then perhaps we need to think in a much more innovative way to come up with a much more innovative solution that can take us a bit further in this direction. So this leads to very, very much I think my thoughts towards like industry 4.0 revolution. I think primarily I think now I'm going to link that with the education 4.0. Why do we really need to think about upgrading our curriculum? Why do we need to think about integrating these aspects into what we learn already? Because as we know that if we do not rely, I think primarily I don't know about perhaps you all are actually up to date with the curriculum that's being offered, but 15 years ago when I was doing my engineering, I remember like many of the things that we read, were pretty outdated. Because and the reason we knew that it was outdated because we were continuously, reading the research papers to see what things are happening. And when I went to the UK, the difference I found that there's always a continuous effort to kind of update the curriculum. So not something which you've been teaching for last 40 years, you continue to teach. We all learn. We all try to see like what is the new emerging domain, where things are moving, where the industry is heading. And one way to really achieve this ambition is to really work together with the industries. And you will see like now there's most of the institutions are now working very closely with industries, because if we are not fully aware of the current demand of the industries, we cannot actually prepare students who can fit in these industries very well as soon as they graduate. So there's a tighter integration with the industries and the institutions nowadays, and I think that certainly is helping to bridge this particular gap. So a bit to give you a context, like how things are shaping up in different country contexts. So if you look at the current educational trend in the UK, Royal Academy of Engineering is an institution, I think, which provides a regular kind of research funding. So they support various schemes for the engineers to work innovatively all across the globe. At the moment, for example, I'm running 2 projects. In fact, I finished 2 other working with colleagues in Indonesia about the supply chain risk, because Indonesia is one of the countries highly risk prone with a number of natural risks like tsunami, sometimes with earthquakes and so on. We finished recently a project with Turkey where we're looking at the smart manufacturing and how we can really kind of ensure that the industries transition towards and what sort of difficulty they do face during this process. Currently, I'm working with Jordan, where we're trying to integrate the IoT and blockchain into the dairy supply chain. So you can see, like the Royal Academy is trying to push those boundaries, and I think not just within the UK, but also trying to ensure that we transfer our knowledge to the developing world. And one thing what they have done, I think one thing they try to promote is like whenever we involved in these sort of projects, we cannot just work with academics. So it's not that one university in the UK will be working from one university in the developing country. It has to be led by the industries. So you need to have industries on board, because it is a mutual kind of, I would say, beneficial thing to do. Because if we simply look at the theoretical aspect of this, it's not going to change the world. And many of us often complain when whether the theory we ever use. The thing is like, yes, we all use, but I think we just need to have that focal lens to see like how this is being utilized. So knowing is just not enough. How you can apply that is quite important. And that's why you will see like there's a huge emphasis in the UK primarily around the project-based learning. So whether you are an undergraduate student, whether you're studying a postgraduate, whatever program you're doing, they all will encourage you to come with some project-based learning. because projects gives you a really hands-on experience working with industry problems, coming with some innovative solutions, and thinking in a way how you can really bring about that change. A lot of innovations actually coming through those ways. Even the universities are putting lots of effort in that particular direction. So, and that is helping to change the whole education system, particularly around the engineering system, because I think in the UK, every other engineering program, you do work very closely with industries at every stage. If you look at in Germany they have the concept of this learning factories. So there, I think again you learn by doing things, and again I think it's a very hands-on thing, and I think this is something is being adopted not just in Germany. Probably it started down there and became more popular. But again, a lot of UK universities are also actually very much focusing on learning factories. Many universities, in fact, feel very proud to provide that sort of a learning factory environment where you can test and practice things. And it's not just happening in, I would say, in the engineering education. In fact, even in the business school where we're actually trying to create next generation of entrepreneurs. So in fact, in the university, we have a dedicated space where actually in one of the programs, the students don't go through the normal or formal lecture session. They actually start running their own business, and they get mentoring from the academics. They get mentors from the industries who help them to build their business. So that sort of approach has been heavily popular, where people want to really get on and do things what they want to do in their future career. So again, that is again a good way of integrating and these practical aspects into our curriculum. It just not only makes it interesting, it makes us to think a little bit more rather than being a passive listener in the class, to become an active participant in everything that we do. If you look at India is not far behind. So it's not that we are actually also at the very forefront. There's also already hands-on learning kind of programs in many universities, and I think many institutions I know and colleges, including yours. I think we have the industry-specific engineering programs. There's lots of interactions and opportunities there. You get to talk to industry professionals and to hear from the experts and learn about the digital technologies or the cutting-edge technologies that is emerging. There's also an open door concept, and I think this is again, I would say, an engineering kind of trend that is emerging in Indian context. So where students actually certainly encouraged to take part in the brainstorming sessions, the group presentations, instructor demonstrations, and so on. Because that actually gives you that confidence, because the practical world is really tough. And I think if you do not have those sort of skill set, if you do not develop along the line of having those technical knowledge, is very difficult. Similarly, I think we are already facilitating this e-learning process, and I think that is doing wonders. Whether we can thank to COVID-19, because one thing what COVID-19 has done is it has actually certainly speed up the whole the adoption toward the technology. I remember we were having this discussion about delivering everything online, probably 2 years before the pandemic hit. But we all were expecting that would happen in within the next 10 years. Nobody ever imagined that this would happen in the span of 1.5 or 2 years time. Because now every other universities, and I think whether it's in India or anywhere in any part of the world, they all are actually able to kind of still facilitate the learning process through the online means. So that is a huge, I would say, shift, in terms of the technology, in terms of our attitude, both from the student side as well as from the academic side. So so what is the future of the workforce? I think if you think about very carefully, what we all are working, and the kind of jobs that we are taking, 10, 15 years ago, that did not exist. And again, as how the technology is progressing, perhaps going forward, not even let's say 10 years, within 5 years, many of the existing job roles will completely vanish. And I think the new job roles will emerge. And that we have seen in this trend. And I think World Economic Forum, they do publish these reports every year in terms of the current trending job profiles and what will the future ones, and which I'll share with you in a minute. And that will just show the extent of the changes that is happening. And also the I would say the preference for the different skill set that changes over time. So what is telling us? And again, we have learned about the Charles Darwin, like survival of the fittest. So here I think it's also about continuous learning. So it's not that once we finish our education, that's it. That never comes to an end. It's a lifelong learning process. If we really want to thrive, as said in the very beginning, and survive and do really well in our career, we continuously need to upskill ourselves, because things, what we are learning over time, new things will emerge. And if we are not at the forefront of adopting those things, then perhaps we will face very difficult scenario. So digitalization certainly is changing lots of things, and I think we are already seeing this sort of trend with the new roles emerging, especially around with the emergence of the robotics and artificial intelligence, machine learning. You could see there's a huge amount of job openings at the moment in these areas. And I think particularly, I would say it's a less of a concern in India because a lot of things we already is part of our educational system. We have been learning those things. And to give you a context, like back in 2006, when I went to Hong Kong and I was working in the area of the machine learning at that point in time. When I moved to UK in mid of 2006, and I was talking about this machine learning, very few people in fact understood what it is. And it was quite shocking. Now, of course, all of us, we now hear as a buzzword everywhere, AI, VI, machine learning, robotics. Many people still don't understand just the buzzword. They don't really understand the core context of that, what these technologies are really built, what in fact it means. So that level of awareness wasn't there, but it is now, it has become quite important. So it is, so many of these technologies, and I always say, like when we talk about the Industry 4.0, these are not new technologies. We've been using this technology for many decades now. What it has done, it has just raised our awareness. We can now see more evidence of these technologies being implemented in different scenarios. We can see the immense benefit that these technologies can bring. And then we're just trying to speed up the implementation of these technologies. So the technologies are there, and I think we hear often by the buzzword, but unless we really use it properly, it's not going to benefit us. And many of the fears that we have is simply because we are not handling some of the sensitive aspects of these technologies. If we can handle those things properly, then that's not a problem. And this is where we need this sort of message to go with our graduates to really understand these things, to really make a positive change to the society and the working practices. So I was referring to this World Economic Forum. They publish these reports annually about the future of the jobs, and it's really handy and freely accessible documents. I will highly recommend to keep a tab if you still have 1 or 2 years to go with the education, just to see how trends are changing in different countries. It also shows you what new skills you need to hone in order to be really competitive and to get the right opportunities and build your career. And there are many ways we can do. We have our technical institutions who would help us to build that foundation. There's plenty of online resources, which you can access if you really want to add on some extra knowledge, which perhaps will help your career. It also depends on interest. If you were interested in a particular domain, and there's plenty of ways how you can get those kind of information and knowledge. The social media, particularly I think the professional domains like LinkedIn is quite helpful, because there you will learn and hear from industry experts about the latest technologies. You will hear from the academics what's going around, what courses being offered, and that is an eye-opener, because that again tells you the trend, and perhaps sometime knowing what is going perhaps in the developed world, today or tomorrow, it will come back to developing countries as well. So, being ready at the forefront and being more proactive, exploring those sort of opportunities and honing those skills. So what is the Industry in Education 4.0? I think perhaps by this time, it is pretty clear that, we're talking about this role of this digital technologies and how this is transforming our kind of education system. So when we talk about the Industry 4.0, what we're talking about is to kind of, I would say, take the full advantage and of the opportunity that has been created by these modern digital technologies. So in order to take that advantage, we certainly need to, have a similar kind of revolution in the education sector. And this is not to just, I would say, to meet the needs of the industry, but also to ensure the best possible student experience and use of staff time, because all of them are quite valuable. And also how we can make smart investment in the states and the facilities to make this happen. So Education 4.0, basically, I would say, it aims to really prepare, better prepare, next generation of the talent through primary and secondary education transformation. And I think, from my perspective, I think this will really drive impact from the 4, interconnected interventions. And that is about implementing new measurements, mechanism for Education 4.0 skill set, mainstreaming technology-enhanced Education 4.0 learning experience, empowering the Education 4.2 workforce. I think that is quite vital. and setting Education 4.0 country-level standards and priorities. And this is already is happening. It's happening here in India as well. I think the government is pushing toward this transition. All the top institutions are leading this, and now every institution within this this country is now slowly embarking on that journey. So we are right on the track. So it's not that we are behind. We might be a bit slower, but we can certainly speed up at this transition. And when we talk about, I think, these sort of Education 4.0, I mean, of course, a lot of things comes in our head. Is it just about just technology? Or, like I said, it's not just about the technology, it's also about, the improving the student experience. So, what Education 4.0 is capable to do, it can certainly, I would say, enable learning anytime, anywhere. And that's what we are doing here. So even if I'm sitting in the UK, India, it doesn't really matter. I can still come and interact with you. You all can learn. You can get a certification by sitting here from the Harvard and any other university in the UK or the US. The role of classrooms also is changing. I think, we're moving, or I would say we are more actually combining with the theoretical to the practical aspects more and more. So it's not that we were not doing that in past, but I think there's more emphasis on bringing that practical insight into our curriculum. There's also, I think, the ability of the education to be personalized. So it is enabling us to have the personalized kind of learning for every student, depending on your capabilities. So what does it mean? So this means that our average student will be challenged with the tasks that are difficult as compared to students who are well below the average. There's also, I think, choice of different education tools and devices used by the education. And I think there's a huge emphasis, as I said, more on the practical application, mainly the project-based application, where actually you work straight into the direct practical problem faced by the industry. To give you again a context, I think a lot of our students, that I teach, for example, in MBA, I teach also on the lot of master's program down there. And one of the modules, I think, what they have to do is a part of the consultancy work. So we work with lots of local industries in that region. We go to them, we tell them, okay, tell me, what sort of problem you're facing. And we try to match those problems with an academic down here who can provide an expert advice together with a student who actually work together with those local businesses, try to understand the problem, and then come up with a set of recommendations that that can help them to overcome some of these challenges. And that has really worked really well because it is a good experience for the students to see what they would do anyways once they graduate. At the same time, industries can also see the benefit of absorbing this younger workforce. They can see their level of critical thinking, their way of thinking very differently and much more innovatively. At the same time, they also get a lot of academic expertise, as a kind of free consultancy. So it's a win-win situation for both. For us, an academic, we are really pleased that our students are really getting hands-on experience. Students are happy because they can see that they're solving the real challenges rather than just some case studies. And the businesses benefit because they get their work done. So, that sort of thing approach is becoming more popular. I think, again, technology is actually also making that possible. Other thing that we are seeing a change in the Education 4.0 is the changes in the exam pattern and assessment. So traditional way of examining things is slowly changing and shifting very much. And I think we are looking at much more outcome based. So what we want the student to achieve at the end. And we're thinking much from that perspective, not from our perspective, what we want, what we think is the easiest way to do. So changing the different examining patterns, again, that has made it possible. Now, one thing probably we all struggled during the pandemic were the exams in the UK, for example. And it was not possible that you can do exams in person because of the lockdown measures and the restrictions imposed by the government guidelines. So we all had to change our assessment strategy. So what sort of assessment strategy would work? And then numerous kind of different approaches were adopted by the different colleagues within were delivering different sort of modules. And it took some time for the academics to adjust to the new settings, same for the student, but now everybody is quite pleased. So that again, kind of experiential learning has become a very fundamental part of the process. But it also means that students have the different set of, I would say, expectations, and especially like when we're talking about some of the impacts of the Industry 4.0 on education is also that the student having a technology-driven expectation. So this is much more, I would say, expectation of the future job markets. So clearly, I would say future workers will be expected to be not only knowledgeable in the industries, but to be trained in the technologies as well, because they all want somebody who can simply come and get on with the job. I mean, of course, industries will have their own training provision, but what they're expecting from us. Because when we talk to industry people, I think what they say, like, whatever you guys teach, when they come out, we have to again retrain them to make sure that they fit in our context. So then we invited them. So we introduced a program where we call it a mentoring program. So for every module, every course that we run, we have industry people on board, and we meet them every year before, during the summertime, before we, kind of introduce and update our curriculum for the next year, to ensure that we have their feedback in terms of what sort of new skill set they're looking for in the industries. And if there's a common pattern that most of the industry, let's say, looking for the student coming out of let's say, an MBA program should have a knowledge of AI, we'd have then decided to work together with the engineering faculties to merge those some of the programs and offer them something around AI. The other thing that is very common feedback that we're getting is technical knowledge is one thing, but also you need to have soft skills. And this is where I think, sometimes we do not put a lot of emphasis. So where do we bring that confidence in the student to present really well, to can stand in front of anyone, can speak very well, all this merging of this transdisciplinary discipline, actually, that is again going to the future. And this is something, again, a trend which is being being pushed out in the UK, is to different faculties to work together. So business school shouldn't be working on its own, engineering faculty shouldn't be working on its own. So at the moment we have a number of programs where actually we work together. So we have engineering management, so where students learn a lot about the engineering core technical skills. At the same time, they also get to hear from the social scientists. We also have behavioral scientists to come and talk about the behavioral side of that, and that is actually helping them to really grasp some two different sort of skill set. And when they go out in the industry, they're really well regarded in that sense. So that sort of transition and the push about the interdisciplinary approaches, again, I think it is going to be the future. Second, I think, again, I said, like, education is getting personal, right? So it's only, I would say, the time for the universities to really embrace this big idea. I think it is their opportunity to really understand the strengths and the weaknesses of the individual's performance, because we all are different. We all have different requirements, different capabilities. So when we have been talking about, I would say, like, this personalized education for ages, but I don't think we have been really implementing this. So why, if you say, like, why online courses really got like more traction? Because anybody can study what they want. It's not something that they're compelled that you have to study this only. So there is, I think, a requirement now that we need to really kind of think beyond this, and especially when you talk about we as a professors, like measuring student performance and behavior, they can also, I think, offer some personalized learning experience. So if a student, for example, is having some sort of learning difficulties, they can always find like new different approaches in their teaching methods. So there's a lot of training, for example, in the UK at the moment is going on that when we teach, we shouldn't be using one specific tool to teach, because some students are really good at, for example, looking at the pictures and they can understand many things. Some students are really good when you talk to them. So they're actually encouraging faculties to use a mix of different approaches to ensure that we target both the active learners as well as the passive learners. And I think that will require a lot of training. And I think this is slowly happening, and I believe this is happening everywhere. We're also seeing a trend, especially about the Internet of Technologies. I think that is taking over. But again, although there's lots of benefit, I think there's some of the concerns, primarily I think around the data security, and that is there in the education sector as well. So how do we really ensure the privacy and confidentiality and the data security? I think that is one of the areas which is currently being looked after, because this is where even the developed countries like UK are not very good at it. And we had like several issues down there, and especially the hacking of the databases and the systems in the university setting. So there are like areas I think that we need to work on, but that again tells us that we need more data security experts. So there's a huge, I would say, career potential if somebody really wants to build a career in that domain, because that is an area that has been largely been ignored despite countries emerging and embarking on this Industry 4.0 journey. And many of you would have already learned about the PDCA cycle in your engineering education, plan, do, check, and act. And I think there has to be design procedure for engineering education, where you need to certainly plan in terms of what you really want to achieve, looking at the industry expectation. And this is where I think you need the inputs primarily from the industry board, and look at their requirements and expectations, and then changing and the program objective accordingly, developing a program, and then ensuring that we deliver those things adequately. And if there are certain changes are needed, we actually act on those changes. So it's a continuous cycle, I said, which we all anyways follow. So it's not something new that I'm talking about. What I think I'm just trying to reinforce here, that we certainly need to have that sort of input from the outside. So we can certainly prepare what we think should be important, but bringing the industry voice into our curriculum certainly can make a huge difference in terms of improving the employability of our students. Now, if we talk about the general competencies for Education 4.0, and there are various, I would say, general skills. So, for example, virtual collaboration. I think we all know about the virtual collaboration. It is a tool that really offers a great value for improving communication. So we have like new virtual social networks developed by companies like Google and Facebook. They're developing that. It also allows organizations to take advantage of the knowledge of all their members, enabling them to really interact more efficiently, rapidly, and regardless of distance, physical, exactly the way that we are interacting at the moment. Resilience, a lot being talked about, especially in this pandemic, but here we are referring to resilience in the educational context. And here we're talking about a way of overcoming some of the diverse challenges that we have faced during this time. And I think this is a development, this skill is certainly quite relevant, either as an individual or for the organization. Because if we are not able to recover, if we are not able to respond to these changes and the challenges, then we are not going to survive. When we talk about the social intelligence, for example, or empathy, this is basically the ability to relate to others effectively and peacefully. And for this, certainly we need verbal and emotional intelligence, and I think listening, paying attention, and managing physical contacts are used. So again, this is an area I think we talk about the social aspect of this, so we can have those hardcore technical skills, but we also need to have a bit of social intelligence to really make these things possible. There are also, I think, lots of novel and adaptive thinking skills. I think this is really important, especially when we want to really facilitate quick and adaptive response to the outside circumstances. I think whether we're talking about the changes happening because of the increasing global connectivity or the market competition or the automation. So if we're expecting that everything gets connected, then I think certainly we have to thank to the new technologies. The whole system, it's also becoming quite unpredictable and also incredibly complex. So having this sort of novel and adaptive thinking will really help engineers to really overcome that sort of complexity. And then also I think local, recognition, cognition management. You've got the sense making, especially I think when we're talking about working with the smart machines, and that's being regularly being deployed in industry setting. So as machines, I'd say, becomes useful and skillful in actually doing some of these advanced tasks, it is really important to develop us as an engineers, I would say, the skill sets, so that I think we can, all these machines can really perform those tasks properly, because it needs some sort of human input, and this is where we engineers come into the picture. So it's very important to have that sort of a sense-making skill set. Similarly, we need to have transdisciplinary approach and the design thinking mindset. So that sort of thing is becoming quite more important, especially as we move towards this engineering 4.0 or education 4.0. Now, this is again taken from the report that I just mentioned about the World Economic Forum, just to give you how things are changing. So back in 2015, these were some of the priority or top skills that were relevant, and you can see within 5 years the priority of some of these skills that have changed. Although the complex problem solving itself, more and more data that we're gathering and more things that we are connecting is certainly making it quite complex. So certainly having this complex problem solving is quite important. Critical thinking, for example, there was in 15 was at number 4, now it's number 2. Creativity, because at number 10 in 2015, has now become almost number 3. So all these priorities are changing. So that again shows, in the sense what industry demands are generally, and what sort of skill set you really need to develop if you really want to be at the forefront of this technology adoption, and I think ensure and improve your employability skills. Again, this slide just simply gives you, and I'll share my slide anyways afterwards, so you all can have a look. It talks about different stable roles, some of the roles that has been stable for a while, some of the new roles that have been emerging over the years. Again, this list will change as we progress towards in the future, in 2022, 2024. 2030, some of these roles will completely go away. And here it just gives you a bit of snapshot, like some of the redundant roles. So something that was quite popular for a number of years, but almost now non-existent in many scenarios. And I think that again shows that in how quickly things are changing and why it is important really for us to really upskill ourselves. Certainly from the institution, from the university perspective, we are trying our best, whatever we could do, but we have got that limited time frame, 3 years or 4 years journey while you are with us. But once you graduate, I think this is something, what our intention is to make sure that we make you capable enough that even if you are outside this education system, you're still updating yourself. You're still trying to learn and hone new skill set. Because that's the only way you can really thrive and in this highly competitive world. And again, just to show you some of the trending skill set, based in 2022, and you can also see some of the declining trends in 2022. And again, this is a research being done a year ago. If you look at the latest report, perhaps that will come sometime in the year, you will see again a significant changes. So it's not that things are changing every 5 years. In fact, it's changing every year because the priorities are shifting, and the pace of the technology adoption is quite fast. And I think is much more sometimes beyond what we can expect and imagine. So, and especially again, I said the pandemic has certainly pushed this. So we have kind of leaped at least 3 to 5 years. What we could have taken at least another 10 years to be there. We have done that in the last 2 years. So you can imagine like in how overnight things can change. So it's quite really important to really kind of hone this sort of skill set in everything that we do. Like what we learn. We can learn a lot of things, in classroom setting. We can learn a lot of things when we work with industries. In the practicals, we can also learn a lot by reading what's happening all around the globe, what technologies people are talking about, what this technology is all about, what sort of wonders it can do, what sort of challenges it can pose. Because if you have that level of awareness, then only you will be able to think more creatively in terms of, okay, if there's a problem, what could be the potential solution? If there are benefits, where these benefits could be implemented. If something is being implemented in one particular industry setting, can we do it in a different setting? What changes? Sometimes you cannot use it as it is. You will always have to tweak something. So what changes could be made to make this feasible in a different context? So understanding of that local context, and then trying to ensure that we can successfully make some of those changes to implement successfully in that context will again would be quite vital. This again gives you a bit of a context on the different industry profiles, especially in the supply chain domain and the role of different technologies that are making. Again, this is a report I think back again talks about workforce in 2018 and 2022. The top left slide is basically from 2018. So that if you look at the current one, there will be massive change. For example, 3D printing. Some of the 3-4 years ago was at the very bottom. But I've seen shift that, and I think that 3D printing is coming at the forefront, especially I would say in the developed world. We've also seen the benefit of 3D printing during this pandemic when we're struggling with the lockdown measures and the supply of the essential kit, especially face visors. In the UK, which heavily depends on the imports from China and many other developing countries, they had a really difficult time, but then 3D printing came to a rescue, especially for the the walls and especially also for the face visors. Lots of university came forward to kind of help this in particular scenarios. You can see that the potential of these technologies, of course, there's a cost implication, and there's more work needs to be done to make it much more effective. So what we need to learn, I think it's quite important to have, of course, the foundational literacies. I think that's quite important, like I said. So what we learn as a part of the standard curriculum, that is important. We need to have that fundamental knowledge and understanding, but also then we need to develop other competencies. Like I said, we need to think very creatively, what sort of competencies that we need to develop. And that will again depend upon our awareness in terms of what the demand of the industry is, where the skill set, the requirements are. If we know those kind of requirements, then we can work upon to develop those sort of skills and competencies. And it's also important to develop some sort of character qualities. Like I said, we are working in a highly dynamic, in a global world, highly complex, and I think world and turbulent world, I would say. And in those kind of scenarios, we really need to have those qualities to really successfully emerge and build our careers. So it is a combination of all the different three aspects: about the foundational literacies, about the competencies, and about the character qualities. And if we can create the right balance of all these three, we can certainly emerge as a successful individuals. And I said, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, what's there in the slide, but I think we've talked a lot about the engineering knowledge and I think how complex things are, and why it is really important to really understand and think in terms of way, like, to be much more critical. But I just wanted to take you a bit of a journey through the different sort of areas. I think particularly, I think, with the advancement in the IoT, I would say, I think systems certainly are getting much more larger, much more connected, and I think much more complex. And to really solve this complex problem, I think particularly to advance, I would say, the current knowledge and the deep knowledge, the technical engineering disciplines, I think should really work together on this. So particularly when we talk about this specialization, I think it has become certainly, I would say, a significant requirement to be competitive in innovation. And that's why we will find, like, some specialized, I think, job opportunities that are emerging. So you need to have those kind of skills, or you need to demonstrate that you can, accumulate those kind of skills to be successful in those kind of roles. So for engineer, I would say the first thing we all need to do is that, we must be, have to be data literate. And that's quite important because, you need to have also really good working knowledge and the skills in our particularly, I would say, algorithmic thinking and programming, because these are the areas I think where there's a huge demand. And in the UK, for example, I can tell you, like, this is what probably the local students don't have, because very few students actually in fact opt for engineering down there, as opposed to India. We are full of engineers everywhere. Every household you will find at least one engineer here. And that's not the case in the UK. And that's why I think they have a huge skill shortage. And you will see, like, if you go to the UK government website in terms of the skill shortage areas, what you will find is the areas we're talking about here, about the programming skills, machine learning skill, data analytics skills. And and now they have started investing, but I think their investment will reap benefits maybe down in the line under 5 years. So there's a huge opportunity for you all, like, graduating maybe perhaps sooner, to explore your career opportunities abroad if you want to. But you need to have and you need to demonstrate those sort of skill set. So there's a huge potential, but again, I said these things will only come when you raise your level of awareness. So what's there? And we know that we are living in a highly competitive world, and even in India, things are very competitive, very difficult. But some of the countries is not so. But I think you need to know where it is. So again, I would certainly encourage you to really raise your level of awareness, look at the skill set. I think where you need to develop expertise. And so from my experience, I can tell you that yes, if you are really good in programming, if you're really good in machine learning, data visualization, for example, the data security, all sort of areas, if you can develop your skill set, you have a really good career lying ahead, in many other countries, not just in India. The other thing I think, I just want to touch upon before we quickly jump upon the other aspect of the supply chain career is about the critical thinking. I think I said, like, and this is something, in past we haven't actually paid a lot of attention, I would say, in education system. I remember, I'm telling more from my own experience when I was doing my engineering here. At that point in time, we were more focused on the core technical aspect. We were not actually, I think our Indian education system, from the very beginning, is not really built to kind of develop those sort of critical thinking. So we have been following in past. Maybe things have changed. I'm not aware what's happened in the last 15 years. It was very much rote learning. So we have to memorize everything. And I think if you look at the approach in the Western world, it's completely different. I think every student is expected to kind of write their response in their own way. So we do not expect the same repetition what everybody else is writing. Because what we're looking for is the creativity. We're looking for the innovative thinking. So one problem could be approached in 10 different ways, not the only one approach that I have taught somebody that this is how it would be solved. So that is, I think, something is quite important. I think especially if you're an engineer, I think you are there to solve the real world problem. You really need to have that sort of problem solving and the critical thinking skills, because then only I think you are, you can actually manage any sort of challenges that you would face. The other thing is, like, with the industry 4.0 developments, I think future of engineers will obviously work in industries. I think as mentioned earlier, like, you will have to work with the smart machines in parallel, right? Now, the universities have to really therefore prepare graduates to have a profile, to an ability to really kind of work across the border with different disciplines and and communicate with each other with different background. I think that is quite important because, as I said, we are not really working in a similar kind of setting. We work with a completely diverse workforce, people from all sorts of different disciplines come together. I think that is more, I would say, more evident in the Western world, because here, you will find all engineers work with engineers. There you will find somebody coming from a drama background, still they have got a specific role to play in that organization. Somebody, on our program come from music. Now, you would say what role the music has to play. But they bring a different perspective of looking at the problem, because it's something that we couldn't think of in that way. So what I'm trying to convey here, like in a sense, you should really be flexible, and you should have the capability to really work together with different disciplines, because right now the way we are moving into the future, we really need these different perspectives, and I think there's a huge emphasis is happening already in the Western world. Slowly it will happen here as well, to bring that interdisciplinary knowledge all together to solve the real world problem. And I think having that sort of collaboration, I think, across locations and discipline is already increasing. That's happening at the research front. Many of your academic colleagues, you would find like they're working with different disciplines. I'm very much from the operations excellence and supply chain background, but I work quite a lot with the behavioral scientists. I work with the agriculture and environmental scientists. I work with the social psychology. So, and the reason why I work with this, because they all bring different fresh perspective into looking at a problem. If we're trying to address and resolve a problem, sometimes having that different views can actually do wonders. So this is something I would say, like an engineer should really focus on developing your own communication and collaborative skill, because collaboration is certainly a key as you move forward in your career. And also the imagination, I said, like creativity I've already touched, and the innovation, I think it is quite important, because if we talk about even just the creativity, I think it is the, I would say, most important, I would say, leadership attribute for tomorrow's engineers, because actually it brings or it involves, I would say, ability to really bring together method, devices, approaches, words, concept, etc. in a novel way. So if we talk about critical thinking, we talk about the creativity, we talk about the imagination. I think these are, I would say, the key to the success of innovation. So here, I think there's a bit of an, I would say, an opportunity, I would say, for the education policies to really need to consider developing these sort of skills as a matter of key importance, because this is something we pay less attention. We're not saying we completely ignore this aspect, we pay less attention to that. But slowly, I think we have been realizing the benefit of bringing this perspective and honing this sort of creating capabilities into our student, actually how that is actually making a big difference. So there's a lot I think needs to be done in this particular domain. But again, I said, like the existing evidence, where these are being practiced properly, it has shown a tremendous potential. So this is something I would certainly recommend that we should be really emphasizing on. And finally, I said, like this is not one-way learning, that if you finish your education, that's it. It never happens. Maybe theoretically it looks like. And I think many of us do come in that once we finish studies, we're not going to look at these books. You might not be looking at the books, but still you will have to learn in a different way. But what is our task, as I would say, in the university, is to really help you become an independent learner, so that even when you go out, you can learn on your own. You can develop and new potential, new capabilities, and actually learn according to the changes that is happening, I would say, in the outside environment. And I think that is quite vital. Technologies are making this possible. You would see like many of the people really working successfully in their own careers, but still they have that hunger to learn new. We often get contacted, for example, on LinkedIn, some of the CEOs and all, they don't sometimes feel like, do they really need to learn this? So they'll come by and say, oh, well, I've learned about this new technology emerging. Can we do something around that? Can I learn something around? So that is in hunger, okay? And then you can see why those people are really successful. They're successful at the top of their career simply because they still have the desire and hunger to learn new. So they are doing perhaps based on the interest. Sometimes you have to do it for your survival. Sometimes you have to do it to really boost your career. So it's quite important. So I think the key message here is that lifelong learning is important. I think it's not going to get away. And finally, I would say, like, when we talk about the competency-based education, and I think this is again an approach, I would say, is about suggesting learning based on developing and demonstrating that competence. So instead of simply, I would say, sitting through the classroom on a specific time period, students should be allowed to show what they know by moving at their own pace. And there's lots of changes. Again, I think approaches are happening across the Western world, certainly. And there's some evidence about, the University of Wisconsin, you can see that Arizona University, they introduced self-paced degree programs. And some of the UK universities are also slowly thinking or in the process of implementing that. But again, I said, going forward, we'll see more and more such offering happening. So this again, I think, is more, I would say, a shift for the educational system to really take this forward. But that would happen, and that will happen fairly soon. And finally, I think we've already seen the digital transformation, I would say, in the education. We already have lots of open education resources. Many of them are freely available. In fact, I think many people during the lockdown, in fact, used that as an opportunity to really gain lots of certification during this time. AI and gamification has been heavily being used. I think gamification already has shown to be quite popular. We already use quite a lot in the engineering education. Perhaps you guys are using that as well. And also, I think again, it's more about creating a next generation, kind of workforce or individuals. I think where actually you can create your own learning pathways. I think that is actually happening. So many universities like Stanford again is coming with the open learning initiative. In the UK as well, I think many universities are actually offering that sort of approach, and I think it is proving to be quite popular. And one of the things that I mentioned about the entrepreneurship, for example, that is one of the, I would say, now it's kind of I would say, innovative and the novel, and I think one of the very unique offering that our university is offering in that region. So it's heavily praised, I think, even by the the UK government in that domain. So there's a huge potential, I would say, that exists, and I think and the digital technology certainly transforming education both ways. But the challenge here again is primarily from the educator side about the training skill set, the university's approach towards this technology, and how quickly they embark on this journey. Many universities were quite hesitant before pandemic, but what I can see, at least in the UK education system, that this pandemic has had a positive impact. And I think it has certainly paved the way towards this digital transformation in the university setting. Now, just the last bit before I just wrap up my talk, I think you can look at the technologies that disrupting the supply chain. Again, this data is a couple of years old. You can see still, like according to the survey, many companies are certainly using some of these technologies, or they see the potential of these technologies. The percentage here is not important, but it just shows that yes, these technologies have a huge potential to play. And if you will look at the recent data, perhaps if you redo the survey, you will see the changes in the priority in terms of the ordering. Particularly, I think robotics and automation has been there for a very long time, so that's the reason I'm not surprised. A few years ago, every other industry were talking about the robotics and automation. But again, I think currently IoT, analytics, AI, these things are certainly gaining lots of huge popularity. So that again show that these things are slowly disrupting the supply chain. Amazon is actually making best use of these technologies. They're having automated warehouses. They have the AGV vehicles. They have predictive analytics. And they have got drone deliveries. They have got automated vehicles. So they're doing everything, even robots, to deliver your stuff and groceries at your doorstep. So those things are happening, but there are at the moment there are few examples. Of course, there's some practical hurdles, not with the technology, but other sides, implementing, especially the infrastructure. But as we move toward the future, maybe in 10 years' time, we will see more and more of such initiatives happening all across the globe. So so that leads to this last aspect of my talk, I think, because certainly I was thinking to talk a little bit about the supply chain management carriers, and I think I came across this in the Supply Chain Digital Forum, but they talk about the 4 supply chain carrier paths that could evolve and thrive in the wake of digital revolution. The first, about the demand planner become a commercial troubleshooter. I think, as we know that equipped with the cloud-based planning systems, the real-time drill down to transaction and learning algorithms, certainly that demand planner of the future becomes a business creator. So this really empowers to prioritize, analyze, and solve supply-demand balancing problem at the transaction level. And I think this is kind of a carrot, I would say, this will reward those who are able to figure it out who gets expedited and who gets shorted while there's still time. So there's a huge potential for the demand plan. This is where I think if you're really good at data analytics, and I'll show you in a minute some of the trends, particularly from the US market, what different carriers and what sort of salaries the people are commanding if they are trying to build their career in that particular domain. Same goes for the production planner. I think, again, there's a huge opportunity that digital technology offers, I think, in terms of the customization. So, especially when you're working with the collaborative robots, that you can reprogram it in minutes. You can sequence simulations. We can digitally test thousands of work paths in second, and also having the machinery, which is the IoT equipped to actually kind of assure precision. So again, the role of the production planner becomes really like a craftsman. So again, there's a huge opportunity, in this SCM, particularly demand planning, production planning, and also the logistic manager, because logistic manager is not limited to simply managing the logistic activities, but actually they're also playing a huge role, especially in terms of driving the customer satisfaction. So we talk about, like, for example, like analytics and automation, and I think how well you plan it and whether you can deliver in time. I think that can have a huge impact on the customer satisfaction. There's a lots of research being done about how you can make your customers more satisfied. I think there's a lot being said, especially from the operational performance perspective. The reliability and dependability has always emerged as a key driver of the customer satisfaction. And finally, I think this sustainability. I think this is again, and I would say very hot and debatable and argued topic at the moment about addressing not just the economic aspect, because traditionally, most of the businesses run from the economic perspective. Now, with the pressure from the government regulations, and certainly there's a push on addressing the environmental concern. What was still being, like, I would say, less emphasized was the social aspect. So how do we really address these three important pillars of the economic, environmental, and society, and I think bring that aspect into supply chain. So how do we really take care of our suppliers, that every stakeholder that is engaged in that supply chain, and I think how do we really make best use of the technologies to make that transition possible. So, that is again an area where actually you will see there's a lots of, I think, opportunities that are emerging in the coming years. Here is just the data from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2020. It just shows that the comparable occupation growth, especially in the supply chain management roles, you can see the distribution managers, operations specialist managers, and there's a significant jump. Same goes for logistics, purchasing, and all other management occupation. And then this trend will be shifting quite a lot. I think you can look at the supply chain management occupation salary by job title. The slides may be not be very clear, but again, you can see the supply chain management people actually command really good salary over time. There's a bit more data also based on the experience, so there's a huge potential. Certainly, I see lots of, I think, job openings in the UK market at the moment, because there is certainly a kind of shortage of the people with the right skill set. So there's a huge demand, and I think we as a university are now trying to really address and fill that kind of skill gap down there. And this again kind of slide which again shows you the salary job by job function. Again, you can see the supply chain management professionals really command good salary. But same goes every other aspects of this is interlinked to supply chain, whether you talk about this in logistics, operation, purchasing, and so on. I will anyway share this slide, so even if the slides are not very clear on the screen, you will have an opportunity to see that later. So where to look for opportunities? I think that is also quite important, because this is a very common question that is being asked. And what I see here, especially, I think this is what we always tell our students back in the UK, that many of the good job opportunities, of course, there are job websites where you can look at. You can also explore the individual companies that you want to really work for. But some of the good opportunities often get posted on the professional website. Primarily, I would say on LinkedIn and Twitter. That's quite a lot. That certainly is a trend, I would say, in the UK setting. There are lots of good opportunities immediately gets noticed on these two platforms. Many of our students have benefited. So having your presence, I think you need to realize that LinkedIn is different than Facebook. Facebook is much more for personal, whereas LinkedIn is much more for professional. So not just having a profile is important, having a good profile is important. And what do I mean by good is having adequate information, because lots of employers nowadays look for potential candidates on these social media websites. So if you are doing some internship, if you got some work experience, you need to make sure that you have that information down there about your educational achievements, any sort of volunteering and other skill set that you have gained over time. Make sure you provide information. Having just the job title is not enough. I think if you say I've done an engineering in this degree, but that meaning of that thing would be different in different contexts. Be very specific. Okay, what different modules have you learned? What different specific skill set have you gained? I've just done internship in XYZ company. That is not enough. But what was your role? So what changes did you make, or what did you study? I think that is quite important. So having a bit of a information and is quite important. And there's a lots of, I think, tutorial down there, again, openly and freely available, where actually you can look at like how to build your profile on these social media platforms. Twitter is same, so joining the right links and right network. Some of the job hunt, I would say the companies would be having their presence. Many of the organization that you would like to work for, if you join them, you will get to know about the new openings. They also not just about the job openings. I think they also tell you more about the kind of areas that they're interested in, or what company is really investing into that area. So raising again your level of awareness. So for example, if you want to work for McKinsey, right? And McKinsey very regularly updates about the latest reports on the various areas they do research on, and you get invited for an interview. If you show your awareness and you know the trend and kind of direction they're heading towards, it certainly is a kind of a success formula. Networking also helps. So I think working very closely with the industry professionals, using network of your peers, your professors, attending conferences, trade shows, and job fairs. They all have shown to really provide you with the right opportunity, where actually you can find the right skill set and right jobs. And sometimes even just browsing, I think on this platform, even if you maybe in the second year still have 2 more years to go, at least you're actually making yourself aware of the shifting trend in the industry. And that will certainly help you to be equipped with a better understanding and grasp of the industry requirements. And then also it gives you an opportunity to think, okay, what other skill set that you need to develop? If you see there's lots of jobs are coming in a specific area, do I know anything about it? If not, where can I learn? And how can I learn? I think that's sort of question, if you start asking yourself, certainly you will have a better future prospect. So I'll finish up here. I think just with a quote, nobody's going to hire you because what you know. I think you will get hired because it depends upon what you know and what you're able to do with it, with your knowledge. And finally, with this quote, I will end. Certainly it's time to re-envision and transform our engineering education system. I think I really welcome and appreciate for inviting me for this session. So all the organizers, I would like to sincerely thanks, and also for all the attendees who are listening to me here, because I think it's a very important debate that we need to discuss and argue, because then only it opens up new ways of thinking. And hopefully, I think I can act as a bit of maybe some change in this direction. So thank you very much for all your patience, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you. Okay, any questions? I'm more than happy to take any questions from the audience.
Thank you, sir. That was truly a mesmerizing presentation. And it is relevant to mention that this event can be considered as an overview of an emerging situation, which is very helpful to explore how the education programs react to Industry 4.0 vision. It is worth highlighting that Industry 4.0 is about cyber-physical systems and the current status of the education reactions that are dominated toward the cyber part. Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For our esteemed participants, I'd like to mention that there will be a question and answer session where our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Vikas Kumar, will be answering your questions. So please be ready with your questions. Sir, I'd like to mention here that our honored Dean Sir, Sri Kanwar Singh Sir, has posted a question here. The question is, so may I? Okay. So what is the future aspects of SCM in India towards engineering?
Thank you very much for that question. I think, I was already mentioning that. I mean, the way that things are transitioning, especially, with Industry 4.0 becoming quite a priority. I think what we're going to see here is lots of job roles, especially around the supply chain, is going to emerge, integrating these technologies together. So how do we really, for example, a lot of work is being done about integrating blockchain into supply chains. We're talking about IoT, and we're talking about data analytics. Now, big data and data analytics have been here for at least for now 5 to 7 to 10 years, being discussed. But they have been discussed, I think, quite in general. But I think what we're seeing, especially during this pandemic, that companies who were able to kind of harness the potential of this technology, they were actually the ones who really survived really well, despite facing all these challenges. So what we would see, like there will be more job roles will be emerging in India, particularly around the analytics in supply chain, blockchains, application supply chain, artificial intelligence in supply chain. Lots of warehouses are now being, being automated now. You have got the modern technologies, drones and other things would be emerging. It could be quite challenging given that the infrastructure down here. But this is something I would say is not it's not impossible. It will happen at some point in time. So there's a huge potential, and I said not just in India, beyond India, because we are living in a highly global kind of world. I'm not sure if there's a lot of echo I'm getting. Is it clearly audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
Okay,
You're
because I'm
perfectly
getting
audible, sir.
echo a lot.
Sir,
So
thanks for
hopefully, I
showing
think
light.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Sir, thanks for throwing light on that question. Sir, we have one more question, if you allow us to raise that question, sir. What are the skills? What are the skills we need to become a successful employer in HCM model?
So I think this is a kind of an interlinked question that I mentioned earlier. I think at the moment the trend that we are seeing is that we are looking for the individuals to have like good analytical skills. I think that is quite vital. There's a lot being development that we're seeing in the machine learning and the artificial intelligence. So programming skill is again becoming very essential. So having a good programming skills, having good data visualization skills, data analysis skills, and also having a skill to really see the bigger picture, ability to really kind of bring and think from the multiple disciplinary perspective. Beyond this kind of, I would say, core skills, I think you also need to develop some other soft skills like ability to collaborate, to develop the network, ability to work with people with a diverse skill set, a diverse background. I think that is another, I would say, social science view of engineering, because they say like, we don't tend to focus on those areas. We are living in a highly complex and globalized world where you will find people from all across the globe working in one setting. So how do we really work together with different cultural, ethnic background stuff? That goes beyond just the core technical knowledge. But as I said, like the skill set that you need is primarily around the analytics. I think is quite vital because that is an area there's a huge shortage, and I don't think there's shortage in India, but certainly beyond India, that is an area where other countries are not up to that mark. And this is the reason you will find most of us Indians, all the Chinese working in those countries in those specific I would say job profiles. It's simply because their own workforce hasn't got those kind of skill set, and that will take a long time for them to bridge that gap. So I would highly recommend to develop your analytical skills, highly recommend to develop your programming skills, and I would highly recommend to develop your networking and collaborative skills. I think you're muted. Sorry, yeah. I can hear you now. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, sir. I'd like to encourage our esteemed participants to share today's webinar with social networking sites. We can use the social sharing icons at the top right of our players to post this webinar directly on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn. We are at the end of this program, and now I'd like to request Rana Chakrabarti sir, Administrative Officer, Asansol Institute of Engineering and Management Polytechnic, to deliver vote of thanks. Please, sir.
Thank you, Devashish sir. Good afternoon, everyone. We are on the verge of these 2-hour international sessions that focused on an emerging trend, and that is engineering education towards Industry 4.0 and career path with supply chain management. I would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Vikas Kumar, for guessing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinion today. I would like to take this opportunity to place on record our hearty thanks to our Honorable Director, Sir, Sri Chen Misro, respected Principal Madam, Dr. Lisha Misro, our beloved Dean of Academic and convener of the today's international webinar, Sri Tanmoy Singh sir, and all the departmental in charge, staffs of AIMP and other dignitaries for their active support and guidance that has extended to all of us at this event. Finally, a big thanks you to our colleagues, participants, and students for their gracious presence. Thank you all for making this event successful with your contributions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Us, it will enrich our students too, as well as our faculty members. In future, we hope we'll be getting you on our portal, and your inspiring words will guide us to achieve benchmark in future. Thank you, sir, for being with us.
In broadcast করে দেবো স্যার
Thank you. I think, certainly, I would certainly love to maybe visit you sometime. I mean, hopefully, once the pandemic is over. I think it has been an absolute pleasure interacting with you all. The only other thing I would say, like, all the students who are listening, if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Please do follow. And I think if you got any specific questions, please do get in touch. I will be more than happy to answer your queries.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you very
Surely,
much
sir.
once again to everyone, all the organizers for kindly inviting me. Thank you.
Welcome, sir. Our pleasure, sir.
এন্ড করে দেবো নাকি রিমুভ করে দেবো হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
So can I